And so immediately he involved him, or they got involved together in the ministry. So he has a lot to do with the ministry of Paul because he became part of it. You remember when we were, I think it was when we were studying Acts, those who were there, Paul, there is a place where it talks about Paul having reached, and he was expecting to meet Titus, and Titus had not come. Now that happened after Paul had sent Titus to Corinth. So there is an episode that took place where there was a problem in the church at Corinth, very serious problems, very threatening, and even to the point where the members were angry with Paul. So Paul, before he goes to Corinth, he was very clever, very diplomatic. He sent his representative ahead, and that representative happened to be Titus. Now, why Titus? I don't know, but that is an interesting point about Titus. Titus is the one who delivered First Corinthians, the letter, and that letter also was very strong. It was strong, not very comfortable for the Corinthians, but that means Titus had to do some diplomacy also, because when we go back to that story in Acts, where Paul reached, was it Troas or somewhere? And he was disappointed because Titus was not there. And God had, it says God had sent him to preach the gospel there. For some reason he decided to leave when he didn't find Titus. Mungu anakutuma mahali na wewe una mambo yako huko. Kama si mazuri umetoroka. It happened. But then he decided to go to Macedonia, and they met Titus there. And remember, it talks about the joy that we had in meeting Titus. Because one of the good things about that meeting is that Titus had come back with positive report from Corinth. And he was even talking about how much the Corinthians are waiting to see Paul. Now things have changed. That means Titus has reconciled them. He has done his counseling there and so on, whatever. There are some terrible things that were happening in Corinth. And remember, I don't know where, somewhere where Paul even talking about they had now started, people had started messing around with their fathers' wives. You know, not their mothers, their fathers' wives. You know, at that time they had Form 2, Form 3. Okay, so things as serious as that, and the influence of the false teachers, some of the teachings that are going on. Okay, now with all that going on, one of the questions that I want to address is in the appointment of leadership, in this confusion and conflict and so on, what kind, I put the question, what kind of a person did Paul need? And we have a very good example in Titus. So I will mention just a few things that made Titus come up and come out in this letter as the person that Paul really needed. And there is one place that is talked about where Paul really needed the right person to send there or to live there, and that was Crete. And I don't know. No, that was in Corinthians, but we will see. So, first of all, the reference of Paul to Titus at the beginning of the letter tells you a lot. He calls him my true son, and it is his true son. How does he describe it? His true son?
In the faith.
In the faith. Does it just say in the faith? No, one translation says in our common faith. In other words, he was his true son because they were sharing the same faith. And that tells you most likely it is Paul who led Titus to Christ. And therefore, Titus became a very strong a disciple of Paul. And they were sharing the same faith. They were not arguing over things and so on. In other words, Titus was a very obedient, a very keen follower. And so he became like a son to Paul in the matters of faith. There was a time when Paul had decided, after 14 years of his ministry, these things tell you a lot more than we saw in Acts, that this 14 years after ministry, Paul decided to go to Jerusalem to meet the church leaders. In fact, he says he doesn't want there to be a conflict between him and church leaders. So he needed to go and meet them and discuss and tell them what he is doing. You know, it's a large area they were covering. What he was doing so that they are in agreement. Because his ministry was centered around Gentiles. In Jerusalem, they were mainly dealing with Jews. And in the area of Gentiles, there were issues, very strong issues. One of them was circumcision that had to be settled and resolved by the church. You know, people like Peter at the beginning still believed in even Christians should be circumcised. So, but what's interesting there is then he decided to go, I think he went with Barnabas, but he decided to take this young man who is a Gentile with him. That's another key point, that Paul saw something in Titus and took him with him on this very crucial mission. And he knew that he is taking with him a Gentile. So that is another very important point. But on the side of Titus, then it speaks well of him because he was ready. He was willing to stand by Paul. When you are in a ministry like Paul, you always need support. You need people who stand with you. Even if you are a pastor in a congregation, don't always think that they will always dance and praise you and this day they say Yigwe, or they will not. There will be those who are keen to hit at you. Every congregation has these people. So don't start thinking, oh, they are not. I'm just giving you a principle. You must know that even your leader, your pastor and other leaders, they need support. They need individuals who will stand with them. First of all, who will pray for them. You know, we don't pray for our leaders. I've told you the story of one of our churches there. I've forgotten the name. Where I was. One time I was conducting a seminar there, and then of leaders. The leaders of the church, they were all there. And when I asked them, how many of you visit and pray for your pastor? They answered in chorus, no. He is the one who is supposed to visit us. So in that church, nobody prayed. Maybe some members did. I'm not saying that nobody, but at least among the leaders, there was a strong feeling that it is not their job to visit their pastor and to pray for him. This is why, again, when you study these people, you find very lonely moments in their lives. People like Paul and others. Lonely moments in their lives when everybody just withdraws. Not that they reject him, they just withdraw because he is the leader, he is the pastor. If there is anything that needs to be understood in the church, he ain't the other. Deal with that. Okay, so, but then Paul had people like, of course we know Barnabas, but we are interested in Titus. Titus stood for Paul. We get that especially in Galatians chapter 2. And then I've mentioned already there was a crisis in Corinth. And then we must ask ourselves, when Paul needed to send somebody, why did he send people like Barnabas and others? Luke was there. He sent Titus, the young man. And you know kuna wazee huko wakali pia. Every church has them who hold on to their tradition, whatever, of the church. But he sent this young man to go. And the results that come out is tremendous, is that he solved the problem. He convinced them and they turned their minds about Paul. And the report also says that they are longing to see you. We are waiting on seeing you. Okay, that one I had already mentioned. I think that's the third thing. Another thing that Paul seems to have seen by the way, here Corinthians, is on 2 Corinthians chapter 7. You'll find that story. Then Paul also observed in Titus a character of a person who can handle difficult situations and troubled situations. Or that one, it goes, is an extension of what I've said. No, another one. He saw in him an organizer, an administrator, somebody who was able to organize things, and he put him in charge when he sent him back to Corinth. And he didn't send him alone, he sent him with some people. You know, witnesses are always very important. Okay? So he sent him back to Corinth to organize the fundraising. Remember, at that time they were collecting money to send to the poor churches in Jerusalem. A very interesting episode in the church also, because these were Gentile churches. And the gospel is supposed to have come from Jerusalem. It's like us, we'll never think of making a collection and sending to Anderson, Indiana, where our church came from. No, they are the ones who are supposed to send us something. Always. But this is the opposite now. The Gentile churches were making collections in order to support the poor churches in Jerusalem. Now, the point we are making there is that Paul saw in Titus an organizer, an administrator, and asked him to take charge, send him back. In fact, he had been involved when he was there. So he said, go and finish the work you had started. Very important about Titus. He saw in Titus, he saw him also grow. Remember, he started by referring to him as my son. He had brought him into the new path of a Christian. And then later on, at a later stage, he refers to him as my brother. That means he has grown now in faith. He becomes, in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13, he refers to Titus as my brother. That is stage 2. As they went on, at another point, he refers to him in still Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 23, as a partner and a fellow worker. Now the young man had grown to the point where now they were partners and fellow workers. No longer my son, no longer just my brother, but a partner, because now they were working together. And then finally, in chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians, Paul is arguing now, he's responding to the matters that came from Corinth. And one place he's telling them, I think, you see, like I told you, there's always funny people, and there must have been some people who had complained about Titus. We don't know. There must have been, because Paul is challenging them. He is asking them, did Titus mistreat you? And then he goes on to say that Titus, or to recognize the point that Titus was a representative of Paul and he wouldn't do anything different. In fact, he says that Titus and him, they walk in the same spirit and follow the same course. In other words, Titus had now gained the confidence of Paul to the point where Paul would not fear or hesitate to send him anywhere. He knows Titus has now captured the thinking of Paul, and whatever Paul would have done, Titus would do. Those of you in leadership, you know what we are talking about. Sometimes you are needed somewhere, something has to be done, and you start cracking your head, who can I send? Because you are not able to go. Who can I send? And it's a kind of funny thing, but you begin to look at people and you see this one is too harsh, this one talks too much, and so on and so on, and so on. So, but Paul had come to a point where he says that him and Titus act in the same spirit and they walk the same course. In other words, whatever he would have done, Titus would do. Titus was able to make the same decisions as Paul and do the same things. Therefore, finally, it was Paul's choice. When you remember what it says in Acts about the Cretans, people from Crete, they say that their own philosopher describes them as
Platons,
liars and brutes and gluttons, lazy gluttons, not just gluttons, lazy gluttons. They do nothing but they want to eat a lot, you know. So those, they were brutes, liars. Working with the liars is the most difficult thing. And that's one thing I thank my mother for. That's one thing she declared, and I learned from her. She cannot live with a liar. She would rather live with other problematic people. And a liar can really mix you up and mess you up. Because it gets you to a point where you never know whether they're telling you the truth or not, once you know them as liars. Now Paul had it, because Paul, you know, was somebody on the journey, evangelism and all that. So he had to find somebody to live in Crete, because the church had been established there now. And it needed somebody now to organize things, to organize leadership, and to do the teaching, and to help the Christians to learn to live a good life, a positive life. And so an honorable life, an obedient life, those are the things that they needed to be taught. Very crucial in any church. And so he saw the right person to live there was Titus. Again, a very high mark for Titus. He is the one who is being put in the most difficult place. Let me tell you a true story. There was a time when in the Church of God, young people used to graduate from theological college, and the tactic that they used was always to send them to the most difficult place. That is not the same as this. They were being sent there so that they give up. And they did. They would give up. The church was just being established in the Maasai land. That's where they used to be thrown. When life was so difficult, if you have a family, it was difficult. If you have no family, it was more difficult. So most of these young people were seen to be thrown there. The people who succeeded there were some elders. There was one elder from Kisa, very good at opening churches. But then the pastors that are brought behind him were these young people who have no experience. They have the certificates, you know. We were looking for a pastor now, and one of the things we are asking for is a certificate of training, which is very important. But certificate doesn't do the work. So that was a tactic. But here it was very important that you get the right person. The person who will endure through this kind of community and establish a church. And so Titus got that job. So all that describes to you the kind of person Titus was, and the kind of people you look for in establishing a leadership, not just a pastor, but any leadership. You look for people who have those qualities. There are many others, but those are just a few that we could pick out about Titus. Very important that when we call on people to do the work of God, there are a lot of areas and aspects of their lives that we must look for. And when you look at it as a whole, there are about three things that Titus had to accomplish. One is to establish the right kind of leadership. Remember, this letter is almost like 1 Timothy. They have a lot in common, 1 Timothy and this one. And the leadership was to be a certain kind of people, not just anybody who prays loud, not just anybody who prays all night, not just anybody who is a good speaker, an orator, simama pale, unashangaa. No, it is deeper than that. And the character of the person. And then I like what Paul says to him, and you read, when we'll get to it sometime. His own example, his own character is when he sent him there, he say, in everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In other words, his life itself should be able to speak to the people. Both those who like him and those who reject him. His life should be able to speak to them. So he should live a life that's an example. Remember, Titus was given the same advice. And all leaders must be given the same advice. Don't let them despise your youth, but be an example, set an example. Now, with your own life as a leader, you must speak to the people. Before you speak to them from the pulpit, or in the committee, or wherever, you deal with people. People out there in the market. What do they hear from you? And so, I think that's enough for today. And I hope that we will seriously now look at the specific assignments and specific requirements as he establishes the church. A lot of things we don't do when we establish the church. I was going to give a good example, but some of you are going to twist the wrong way, because we always do. A wrong example, like from here, when we establish, let me give it to you, ukienda kuimesa shauri yako, Mungu atadili na wewe. When we established a congregation in Kitengela, we never even, I'm not talking about Victor, I'm just talking generally. We never even agonized about who can listen to them. Tuliona tu huyu kijana ndiye amesoma aende. No, that's a good way of getting rid of a person also. But we need to really agonize about it. Even these elections we are doing, if we are serious Christians, we should be agonizing about it. We don't just look at a certain thing good about somebody and then, in fact, if you want to be elected quickly, just give a lot of money to the church. Wacha ujulikane kama mtoaji, you get all the votes. Tafuta pesa, tapata kazi. Okay. So I'm saying that when we establish any leadership, not only out there but even in here, we need to agonize about what kind of a person. Because that kind of a person, again going back to Timothy, must have the approval of God. We must seek somebody who seeks, and the church in appointing people must seek the approval of God. And it's not that easy, and it's not that simple. Because you'll find some very good people, some very faithful people that you have to say, no, this is not the right kind of person. There will be some difficult people, but in them you see the qualities of God for leadership. So I wish you spread that gospel. I don't know how easy it is spread. I know it's not easy. But we should look for the quality and the Spirit of God in people in order for them to be able to uplift the life of the church. Any question from any corner?